August 29, 1944, 3:47 a.m., Route Nationale 13, Normandy, France. Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz stood at a crossroads near Alençon, his binoculars trained on the western horizon. The pre-dawn darkness should have been silent, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. Instead, a low, continuous thunder rolled across the French countryside, growing steadily louder. Von Luttwitz, operations officer for the 2nd Panzer Division, had heard this sound before during the retreat from Falaise. But this was different. This was constant, mechanical, relentless. As the first light touched the sky, he saw them. A convoy of trucks stretching from horizon to horizon, headlights blazing in defiance of every principle of military caution. 2.5-ton GMC trucks, painted olive drab, moving bumper to bumper at 30 miles per hour. Von Luttwitz counted vehicles until he lost track somewhere past 300. The convoy continued for another 40 minutes. Unmöglich, he whispered. Impossible. What von Luttwitz witnessed was a single segment of the WWII, the logistical operation that German intelligence had declared impossible, that Wehrmacht planning officers had dismissed as American fantasy, and that would ultimately deliver more tonnage than the entire German railway system in France during the same period. The mathematics alone defied belief. In 81 days, from August 25 to November 16, 1944, the WWII would move 412,193 tons of supplies over roads the Germans had considered barely adequate for civilian traffic. At peak operation, 5,958 trucks operated continuously on a 686-mile round-trip loop, completing the circuit every 54 hours. Each truck carried 5 tons, burned 50 gallons per trip, required maintenance that German logistics officers couldn't imagine sustaining, and somehow kept moving. The German High Command had built its entire defensive strategy on a single assumption, that Allied logistics would collapse somewhere between the beaches and the Rhine. They had calculated fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, food requirements, and replacement vehicle needs. Every equation led to the same conclusion: the Americans would outrun their supply lines somewhere in central France, probably near the Seine, certainly before the German border. They were wrong. The story of how spectacularly wrong begins not in Normandy, but in the deserts of North Africa and the industrial heartland of Michigan. It begins with a stubby, ugly truck that military planners initially rejected as unsuitable for modern warfare, and ends with German generals watching their final defensive plans dissolve under an avalanche of American steel, fuel, and ammunition that should never have reached the front. Major General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, received the first German intelligence assessment of American logistical capabilities in July 1944, captured from a German headquarters near Caen. He read it twice, then called his logistics chief. "The Germans think we'll need 26,000 tons per day to sustain offensive operations past the Seine. They've calculated we can't possibly deliver more than 15,000. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ross, Deputy Chief of Logistics for the European Theater, studied the document. "What are we actually moving? Yesterday, 32,000 tons. Today's estimate is 35,000. By September, we'll need 50,000. The German calculations weren't wrong. They were based on conventional military logistics, on railways and depots, on the methodical movement of supplies through established infrastructure. What the Germans couldn't imagine, what their entire military culture rejected as impossible, was that the Americans would simply bypass all of that and do it with trucks. The GMC CCKW 353, universally known as the Deuce and a Half, was America's answer to a question no one else was asking. In 1940, as Europe burned and American military planners tried to design vehicles for a war they hoped to avoid, the Quartermaster Corps issued specifications for a standardized tactical truck. It needed to carry 2.5 tons on-road, 1.5 tons cross-country, ford 30 inches of water, climb a 60% grade, and be simple enough for conscripts to maintain. GMC's chief engineer, Edward Riley, delivered something that looked like a compromise between a commercial truck and a tank. The cab was angular, uncomfortable, and drafty. The six-cylinder OHV engine produced only 104 horsepower, barely adequate for the weight. The dual rear axle arrangement added mechanical complexity. Test drivers reported it handled like a drunk elephant. The Army ordered 812,000 of them. What Riley had created, almost accidentally, was the most versatile cargo vehicle ever mass-produced. The basic chassis could mount dozens of different bodies: cargo beds, fuel tankers, water carriers, machine shops, kitchens, ambulances, and even anti-aircraft guns. The engine, while underpowered on paper, was virtually indestructible. The transmission featured a 2-speed transfer case that effectively gave it 10 forward gears. Most critically, it could be maintained by barely trained mechanics using minimal tools. By June 1944, American forces in England possessed 57,000 2.5-ton trucks, 22,000 1.5-ton trucks, and support vehicles that brought the total to over 200,000 wheeled transport units. The British, observing this accumulation, quietly suggested it was excessive. One British logistics officer calculated that the Americans had brought enough trucks to move every man, weapon, and supply crate simultaneously. He meant it as criticism. The Americans took it as confirmation that they were properly prepared. General Feldmarschall Günther von Kluge, commanding Army Group B in France, received his own intelligence assessment in early July. The report, compiled by Fremde Heere West, Foreign Armies West, under General-Major Gerhard Graf von Schwerin, analyzed Allied logistics with Prussian thoroughness. The American force requires approximately 650 tons of supplies per division per day during active operations. This includes ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, and replacement equipment. With the current Allied strength at 39 divisions, the daily requirement exceeds 25,000 tons. Logistical capacity based on captured port facilities and road networks, maximum 18,000 tons per day. Conclusion: sustained offensive operations beyond the Seine are logistically impossible for a minimum of 6 months. Von Kluge found the analysis comforting. It matched his own assessment and offered strategic hope. The Allies might break out of Normandy, might even reach the Seine, but they would stop. They had to stop. Mathematics demanded it. The mathematics didn't account for the American willingness to discard every conventional rule of military logistics. Operation Overlord's logistics plan, developed over 18 months by Colonel Ross and his staff, was deliberately conservative. It assumed controlled ports, functioning railways, and conventional depot systems. Supplies would flow through Cherbourg and later Brittany ports, moving by rail to forward depots, then by truck to divisional supply points. The system was methodical, predictable, and completely inadequate for the breakout that occurred after Cobra. On July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra shattered German lines south of Saint-Lô. Within a week, Patton's Third Army was racing through Brittany at speeds that made resupply impossible through conventional means. Divisions were advancing 30 miles per day. Supply columns couldn't keep pace. Forward units were running out of fuel, ammunition, and food. The response was uniquely American: ignore the plan and make it work anyway. On August 21, 1944, Major General John Lee, commanding Communications Zone, the massive logistical organization supporting Allied forces, received orders that would have horrified a German logistics officer. Begin immediate delivery of 75,000 tons of supplies to forward areas using truck transport only. No railways, no depots, just trucks, roads, and drivers willing to run 20 hours a day. "Sir, that's insane," his operations officer protested. "We don't have the road capacity. We don't have traffic control. We'll have gridlock from here to Paris." Lee, a logistics officer who had managed commercial trucking before the war, smiled grimly. "Then we clear the roads. Nothing moves except supply trucks. Mark the route, post guards, and tell every other vehicle to get off our highway. We're going to run the biggest truck convoy in history." The plan was technically simple and practically impossible. Designate a route from the Normandy beaches to the forward supply points, clear it of all other traffic, run loaded trucks east, empty trucks west continuously until the supply crisis is resolved. Maintain average speeds of 25 miles per hour over roads designed for 10. Keep trucks moving with roadside maintenance. Replace broken vehicles from reserves. Continue indefinitely. They called it the Red Ball Express, borrowed from railroad terminology where Red Ball freights received priority over all other traffic. The name appeared on every vehicle, a red ball painted on the hood, doors, and tailgate. That marking meant absolute priority. Military police would stop generals to let red ball trucks pass. The operation began officially on August 25, 1944, the day Paris fell. The first convoy of 132 trucks departed from Bayeux, destination Chartres, 150 miles distant. German spotters reported it to von Kluge's headquarters as a reinforcement column. By the time they realized it was supplies, not troops, 4 more convoys were already en route. Lieutenant Wolfgang Scherer, intelligence officer for the 116th Panzer Division, interviewed French civilians in early September. His report revealed German confusion. Prisoners and civilians report continuous American truck traffic on all major roads. Convoys extend for miles, moving day and night without pause. When asked about numbers, civilians consistently claim impossibly high figures, suggesting the psychological impact of constant traffic. Assessment: Americans have committed significant transport resources, possibly unsustainable. The figures weren't impossible, they were merely unprecedented. At peak operation in September 1944, the Red Ball Express operated 5,958 trucks on 2 primary routes, totaling 686 miles round trip. Average turnaround time, 54 hours, including loading, driving, unloading, and maintenance. Each truck made approximately 2 complete trips per week. Total capacity, 12,500 tons per day, 1/4 of the total Allied supply requirement, delivered entirely by wheeled transport over roads never designed for such traffic. The trucks themselves became mobile lessons in American industrial philosophy. Each GMC CCW came from the factory pre-broken in, tested at full load over a grueling course at the proving grounds. The engines were deliberately over-engineered, designed to tolerate neglect, poor fuel, and drivers who had learned to shift gears 3 weeks ago. Critical components were doubled: twin ignition coils, dual fuel pumps, and backup electrical systems. The maintenance philosophy was equally pragmatic. Mechanics were given instructions to replace, not repair. Broken water pump? Replace it, 5 minutes with basic tools. Engine trouble? Replace the entire engine, 1 hour with 3 men at a hoist. The logistics system kept entire trucks in reserve. A vehicle that required more than 2 hours of repair was simply replaced. Private James Davis with the 3897th Quartermaster Trucking Company described the operation. "We had trucks break down every hour. Didn't matter. We'd pull it off the road, grab a replacement from the pool, and keep moving. I once changed an entire engine in 45 minutes. Didn't rebuild it, just unbolted one and dropped in another. Everything was standardized. Every bolt is the same size. Every connection is identical. You could work in the dark if you had to. We often did." The drivers were predominantly black soldiers assigned to transportation units as part of the Army's segregated structure. The 75% black composition of Red Ball Express units was a reflection of racism in military assignments, but the operation's success demonstrated capabilities that contradicted every prejudice of the era. These men, many with minimal driving experience before induction, operated heavy trucks through combat zones for 20 hours at a stretch. The average Red Ball driver was 24 years old, had been a civilian 3 years earlier, drove trucks he'd first seen 6 months before, and covered 800 miles per week under conditions that would horrify modern safety regulators. They drove without lights in combat zones. They drove through German artillery fire. They drove on roads cratered by bombs, clogged with refugees, contested by retreating Wehrmacht units. Sergeant Benjamin King of the 3558th Quartermaster Truck Company kept an unofficial log. August 28th, 3 trips to Charts, got strafed once, didn't stop. August 29, 4 trips, 1 vehicle lost to mine. August 30, roads were so jammed we averaged 15 miles per hour, still made quota. August 31, a driver named Johnson fell asleep at the wheel, hit a tree, replaced the truck in 10 minutes. Johnson slept 4 hours, back driving. September 1, same routine, same roads, same loads, different day. The monotony of the entries concealed a brutal operational tempo. Drivers slept in their cabs during loading, grabbed food while mechanics checked vehicles, and urinated in bottles to avoid stopping. The standard trip from St. Lo to forward depots near Charts required 8 hours of continuous driving. Most drivers made the round trip in 20 hours, slept 4, and did it again. The Germans watched in disbelief. Oberst Gunther Reichhelm, operations officer for OB West, compiled reports through September 1944. His summary to von Rundstedt, now back in command after von Kluge's suicide, revealed complete bewilderment. American supply convoys operate continuously on all major roads. Traffic density exceeds anything observed on the German Autobahn during peacetime. Vehicles appear identical, suggesting a single manufacturer, impossible under wartime economy. Maintenance appears minimal, yet vehicle availability remains constant. Assessment: American industrial capacity exceeds previous estimates by a factor of 3 to 5. Logistical collapse previously predicted shows no evidence of occurring. What Reichhelm couldn't see, what German intelligence never grasped, was that the Red Ball Express was improvisation elevated to operational art. There was no manual for running 6,000 trucks continuously over 700 miles of French roads. Traffic control was invented daily. Maintenance procedures evolved hourly. The entire operation violated every principle taught at logistics schools. It worked because Americans treated logistics as a problem to solve rather than a system to administer. When trucks began wearing out tires at catastrophic rates, the solution wasn't to reduce operations or improve roads, it was to establish tire depots every 50 miles and replace entire wheel assemblies in 5 minutes. When engines failed from sustained high-speed operation, the response wasn't to reduce pace but to build engine replacement depots and keep spare engines on flatbed trucks. When drivers fell asleep and crashed, the Army added co-drivers. When co-drivers also fell asleep, they instituted mandatory 4-hour rest periods. When rest periods reduced tonnage delivered, they added more trucks. Every problem was solved by adding resources, not by reducing operations. The scale of resource commitment was staggering. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel daily, requiring that 10% of cargo capacity be dedicated to fueling the supply system itself. Tire replacement ran at 20,000 tires per week. Spare parts consumption exceeded the entire German tank production for replacement components. But the cargo reached the front. On September 2, 1944, elements of the 3rd Armored Division, part of Hodge's First Army, reached the Belgian border near Mons. They had advanced 200 miles in 5 days, consuming ammunition and fuel at rates that should have stopped them cold by the Seine. Instead, they found supply dumps fully stocked, established by Red Ball convoys that had raced ahead of the advance. Captain Belton Cooper, maintenance officer for the 3rd Armored, recorded his astonishment. "We expected to wait for supplies. That's what always happened in maneuvers in North Africa in training. You advance, you outrun your supplies, you wait. Instead, we found fuel trucks waiting for us. Ammunition trucks are right behind. Food, replacement parts, everything we needed. I asked the supply officer how they'd gotten here so fast. He just pointed at the road. There were trucks as far as you could see, all heading east, all loaded. It was like someone opened a faucet and supplies just poured out." Generalleutnant Hans Speidel, Chief of Staff to von Kluge and later to Model, attempted to understand the phenomenon. His September 12 report analyzed Allied logistics with desperate precision. Enemy maintains offensive operations at a pace requiring a minimum of 45,000 tons daily supply. Rail infrastructure remains damaged from our demolitions and Allied bombing. Ports available to the enemy remain limited, with Cherbourg far below capacity and Antwerp not yet operational. Despite these constraints, enemy advances continue without evidence of a supply shortage. Conclusion: either our estimates of required supply tonnage are vastly incorrect, or the enemy has developed transport capacity beyond comprehension. Both conclusions were correct. American divisions did require the tonnage German intelligence calculated, and American transport capacity was beyond German comprehension. The industrial underpinning was vast. GMC's truck plant in Pontiac, Michigan completed 1 CCKW every 10 minutes during 1944, operating 24 hours daily. The plant employed 28,000 workers, 40% of them women. Each truck required 3,500 individual parts from 700 suppliers. The logistics of building trucks to move supplies involved more complexity than the German tank program. The tires alone represented an industrial commitment that staggered German analysts. Each truck required 10 tires, 6 mounted and 4 spares. At a production rate of 500 trucks daily, tire production required rubber allocation equivalent to 30,000 automobile tires per day. American synthetic rubber production, driven by war necessity after the Japanese conquest of natural rubber sources, exceeded German output by a factor of 15. The steel in a single CCKW required ore, blast furnaces, rolling mills, and finishing plants. The 3,500 pounds of steel per truck, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of vehicles, represented more steel than total German armored vehicle production. The glass, rubber, copper, aluminum, and fabric added tonnage that would have equipped entire German armies. Yet trucks were disposable. When maintenance exceeded 2 hours, vehicles were often abandoned rather than repaired. The replacement cost was negligible compared to the operational delay. Whole truck graveyards appeared along the Red Ball route, filled with vehicles awaiting parts, engine swaps, or eventual salvage. German intelligence, finding these graveyards, initially assessed them as evidence of unsustainable losses. They failed to notice that for every abandoned truck, 2 new ones appeared. The human cost of Red Ball operations received less attention than it deserved. Between August and November 1944, transportation units suffered 10% casualties, not from combat, but from accidents, exhaustion, and the brutal pace of operations. Drivers fell asleep at the wheel and crashed. Mechanics were crushed by falling engines. Traffic accidents on roads designed for civilian speeds killed more men than German action. Private Samuel Jones, driver for the 36th 33rd Quartermaster Truck Company, survived the entire operation, but barely. Lost 3 friends in September, none of them shot. Miller fell asleep, hit a bridge abutment, truck went into the river. Thompson took a corner too fast with a full load. The truck rolled, crushing him. Williams just stopped breathing one night. The doctor said his heart gave out from stress. We kept driving, had to. The boys at the front needed what we carried more than they needed us alive. The psychological toll was heavy. Drivers developed what medics called road hypnosis, a dissociative state where they continued driving while essentially asleep. Some men reported driving entire trips with no memory of the journey. Others developed nervous conditions from sustained high-stress operations. The Army's response was grimly practical. Rotate drivers out after 90 days, assign them to rear echelon duties, replace them with fresh men. The supply officers managing the Express worked under similar pressure. Major Cyril Gordon, operations officer for the 1st Transportation Truck Corps, coordinated 1,500 vehicles from a command post in a requisitioned French school. His daily report from September 10th reveals the relentless demands. 0600 dispatched 347 vehicles from staging area A. 0730 accident at kilometer 47 blocking southbound lane, rerouted traffic, 2-hour delay. 0945 Forward Depot at Le Mans reports critical ammunition shortage, diverted 23 trucks from food run, ETA 1600. 1200 Fuel Depot at Alençon running low, requisitioned civilian fuel trucks from Cherbourg. 1430 Mechanical failures exceed replacement rate, requested 150 new vehicles from England. 1800 received orders to increase daily tonnage by 2,000 tons, no additional vehicles available, increased loads per truck from 5 to 5.5 tons. 2200 reports of German aircraft over the route, ordered blackout driving until 0400. 2330 3 vehicles missing, presumed broken down or lost, dispatched recovery teams. This was a single day, repeated for 81 days. The physical strain on vehicles defied design specifications. The GMC CCKW was engineered for a 50,000-mile service life under normal military usage. Red Ball trucks averaged 800 miles per week, much of it at sustained high speed with overload. Theoretical service life should have been 63 weeks. Most trucks required a major overhaul after 12 weeks. Some failed within 8 weeks. The solution wasn't to reduce load or speed, it was to accept accelerated wear as the cost of operation and feed new trucks into the system at whatever rate necessary. By October, the WWII was consuming trucks at a rate of 300 per week, not from combat loss, but from mechanical exhaustion. Each worn-out truck was replaced from pools in England, themselves fed from convoys from American factories. German analysts, noting the truck attrition rate, calculated that American logistics would collapse under vehicle losses. Their math was correct. Their conclusion ignored American production capacity. The Pontiac plant alone produced more trucks in 1 week than Germany manufactured in a month. Ford's truck plant in Dearborn added similar numbers. Dodge, Studebaker, International Harvester, and others contributed thousands more. American truck production in 1944 exceeded 600,000 vehicles, enough to replace the entire Red Ball Express every 2 months. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff for OKW, received a comprehensive analysis in October 1944 from Frenda Herr West. The report, compiled from prisoner interrogations, captured documents, and observation, attempted to explain Allied logistics. The enemy demonstrates logistical capacity that cannot be reconciled with conventional military organization. Motor transport operates at intensity and scale without precedent. Vehicle losses from all causes reach 15% weekly, yet operations continue without apparent degradation. The source of replacement vehicles remains unclear. American industrial production estimates may require upward revision. Strategic implication: the assumption that enemy logistics would constrain operations is demonstrably false. Enemy can sustain current operational tempo indefinitely. Jodl forwarded the report to Hitler with a note: "The material superiority of our enemies exceeds previous estimates. We are fighting not an army, but an industrial system." Hitler's response has been lost to history, but German strategy from October forward reflected growing desperation. If American logistics couldn't be broken by natural constraints, it would have to be broken by force. The Luftwaffe, husbanding reserves for months, launched Operation Baseplate on January 1, 1945, targeting Allied airfields. The attack destroyed significant numbers of aircraft, but cost Germany 271 pilots, many of them irreplaceable instructors. The operational effect on Allied logistics was negligible. Truck convoys continued regardless of air superiority. German ground forces attempted interdiction of supply routes with more success. On September 17, elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division ambushed a Red Ball convoy near Mézières, destroying 23 trucks and killing 31 drivers. It was one of the most successful German actions against Allied logistics. The convoy reformed with replacement vehicles within 4 hours and completed deliveries that evening. The destroyed trucks represented 0.4% of the Red Ball fleet, and the lost supplies less than 0.02% of the daily tonnage. Oberst Heinrich von Leutwitz, the same officer who had watched in disbelief from the crossroads in August, found himself commanding a Kampfgruppe during the Battle of the Bulge in December. His unit achieved initial success, penetrating Allied lines near Bastogne. Then the fuel ran out. German vehicles, designed for railway resupply, couldn't advance beyond the range of their supply dumps. The offensive stalled not from enemy action, but from logistics. Von Leutwitz, surrounded and facing capture, watched American trucks bringing supplies to Bastogne despite German encirclement. C-47 aircraft dropped supplies by parachute, but the majority arrived by truck, running through German-held territory at night, headlights blazing, daring anyone to stop them. In his post-war memoir, von Leutwitz wrote, "We were defeated not by better tanks, better planes, or better soldiers. We were defeated by trucks. Tens of thousands of trucks, carrying everything an army needed, were arriving faster than we could destroy them. Our soldiers were brave, our tactics sound, our weapons adequate. But we moved by horse and railway. They moved by an internal combustion engine. The war was decided not at Stalingrad or Normandy, but in Detroit and Pontiac." The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16, 1944, when the port of Antwerp opened and rail capacity was restored. In 81 days of operation, the Express had moved 412,193 tons of supplies, over 41,105,834 vehicle miles. The operation consumed 94 million gallons of fuel, wore out 92,774 tires, and destroyed or exhausted 432 trucks through mechanical failure alone. Those statistics represented success beyond anything planned. The Express had moved more tonnage per day than German railways in France at peak efficiency. It had sustained Allied advance across France and into Germany itself. It had proved that American industrial capacity could overwhelm any logistical constraint. More significantly, it had demonstrated an operational philosophy that separated American warfare from European tradition. German military thought emphasized careful planning, methodical advance, and conservation of resources. American doctrine increasingly emphasized improvisation, sustained pressure, and expenditure of resources to achieve objectives. The Red Ball Express was a pure distillation of this philosophy. When conventional logistics proved inadequate, Americans built new logistics from scratch. When trucks wore out, they built more trucks. When drivers collapsed, they found more drivers. Every problem was met not with careful redistribution of limited resources, but with massive application of additional resources. The approach was wasteful, inefficient by traditional measures, and completely effective. Post-war analysis by European military theorists criticized the Red Ball Express as logistically unsound. They noted the high fuel consumption, vehicle attrition, and human cost. They calculated that improved rail transport would have been more efficient. Their criticism missed the point entirely. The Express wasn't designed for efficiency, it was designed to work immediately, without waiting for infrastructure. Major General John C. H. Lee, commander of CZ, defended the operation in testimony to Congress in 1946. We were told repeatedly that supply by truck over such distances was impossible, unsustainable, wasteful. The critics were correct on all points except the one that mattered. It worked. Our trucks delivered the supplies, our armies advanced, we won. Efficiency is measured by the achievement of the objective, not by resource consumption. The Red Ball Express achieved its objective completely. The lessons were not lost on future military planners. American logistics in Korea, Vietnam, and Desert Storm all reflected Red Ball philosophy: use overwhelming transport capacity to eliminate supply constraints. Modern military logistics, with its emphasis on containerization, air transport, and just-in-time delivery, evolved directly from principles tested on Norman roads in 1944. The trucks themselves became iconic. The GMC CCWK, scorned in 1940 as ugly and underpowered, became perhaps the most successful military vehicle ever designed. Production exceeded 560,000 vehicles. They served on every front, in every climate, with every Allied army. Surplus Deuces remained in service with various militaries into the 1990s, 50 years after production ended. Private James Davis, the mechanic who changed engines in 45 minutes, kept one after the war. In a 1984 interview, he explained, "I bought it from Army surplus in 1946 for $300. Still have it, still runs. Changed the oil regularly, replaced wear parts, but the basic truck is original. It's been hauling hay on my farm for 40 years. Same engine, same transmission, same frame. They built them to last, built them simple, built them right. That truck won the war as much as any tank or plane." The human legacy was more complex. Black drivers who had proven their capability under brutal conditions returned to segregated America, where their achievement was minimized or ignored. The Army's official history of the Red Ball Express, published in 1947, mentioned their racial composition in passing, but focused on operational statistics. Recognition came slowly, often only after the civil rights movement forced broader acknowledgement. Not until 1994 did the U.S. Postal Service issue a stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. By then, most veterans were dead. Those who survived to see recognition generally expressed pride mixed with bitterness. They had proven themselves under conditions that would have broken many men. The proof had changed a few minds in 1945. Sergeant Benjamin King, the driver who kept the unofficial log, lived until 2002. In his final interview, recorded by the Veterans History Project, he reflected, "We knew what we were doing mattered. Every trip meant some soldier got ammunition, got food, got fuel for his tank. We kept the Army moving. Didn't matter that most people didn't know, didn't care, didn't want to acknowledge what we'd done. We knew. The Germans knew. That was enough." The German soldiers certainly knew. Veterans of the Western Front, interviewed decades after the war, consistently cited Allied logistics as the most overwhelming aspect of their defeat. They had faced numerical superiority before, on the Eastern Front, in North Africa. They had adapted tactics, used interior lines, and traded space for time. Against the Red Ball Express and the logistics system it represented, no adaptation sufficed. The trucks just kept coming. General Lieutenant Hans Speidel, who had written the September 1944 analysis, was captured in 1945 and extensively interrogated on German intelligence failures. His assessment of the Red Ball Express was clinical. We understood American industrial capacity in abstract terms. We knew they produced more tanks, more planes, more of everything. But we imagined this production would stay in America, building reserves for future operations. The idea that they would commit such resources to a single logistical operation seemed wasteful, almost irrational. We expected them to husband resources as we did. Instead, they spent resources like water. The trucks that supplied their armies cost more than our armies themselves. This was thinking we couldn't match, resources we couldn't imagine, and commitment we couldn't counter. The final cost accounting, compiled by the U.S. Army's Transportation Corps in 1946, revealed the scale of commitment. The Red Ball Express had directly employed 23,000 drivers and 6,500 maintenance personnel. Support staff in loading, traffic control, and administration added 15,000 more. Total personnel, 44,500, more than 3 German divisions. The vehicle cost, calculated at $2,500 per truck, represented $15 million in rolling stock for the initial deployment. Replacement vehicles added another $8 million. Fuel, tires, parts, and supplies brought the total operation cost to approximately $50 million for 81 days, equivalent to $800 million in 2024 dollars. For comparison, the total German military budget for the same period was approximately $200 million. The Americans spent more on a single logistical operation than Germany spent on its entire Western Front. This was the real lesson of the Red Ball Express, the one German generals finally understood but could never counter. The United States fought a fundamentally different kind of war, one where resources were tools to be expended rather than treasures to be hoarded. The contrast wasn't just quantitative, but philosophical. German military doctrine emphasized achieving maximum effect with minimum resources, a legacy of Prussian efficiency and industrial scarcity. Every tank, every round of ammunition, every gallon of fuel was precious. Operations were planned to minimize waste. Logistics was about distributing scarce resources optimally. American doctrine, forged in a nation of continental abundance, viewed resources as problems to be solved with more resources. Tank broken? Replace it. Ammo low? Deliver more. Logistics constrained? Build more trucks. The approach seemed wasteful to European eyes, but it reflected a different economic reality. The United States in 1944 produced more than Germany, Japan, Italy, and the occupied territories combined. American GDP exceeded the Axis powers plus the Soviet Union. This wasn't a slight advantage, but an overwhelming disparity. The nation could afford to be wasteful because waste was cheaper than delay. The Red Ball Express embodied this philosophy perfectly. Running 6,000 trucks for 81 days was vastly inefficient compared to properly functioning railways. It was also immediately available, infinitely scalable, and completely effective. Efficiency could wait for peace. Victory required speed. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, Stalin reportedly asked Roosevelt about American logistics. The Soviet leader, commanding forces supplied by American Lend-Lease, understood industrial capacity, but he wanted to know how Americans sustained offensive operations across France without pause. Roosevelt's response, according to witnesses, was simple: "We build trucks faster than the Germans can shoot them." Stalin laughed, recognizing both truth and strategic statement. The Americans weren't just winning through resources, they were demonstrating that resource advantage was itself a form of military superiority, perhaps the most decisive form. The final Red Ball convoy rolled on November 16, 1944, arriving at a forward depot near Liège with 175 tons of ammunition. The drivers, many of them on their 50th round trip, completed standard unloading procedures, signed cargo manifests, and drove back to staging areas for reassignment. There was no ceremony, no official recognition, no pause to acknowledge what had been achieved. The thunder faded from the roads of France. The highway markers with their red balls were removed. The truck parks were emptied as vehicles dispersed to conventional supply operations. Within a week, no physical evidence remained that 6,000 trucks had operated in continuous convoy for nearly 3 months. But the supplies remained at the front. The ammunition that broke the Siegfried Line, the fuel that carried Allied tanks into Germany, the food that sustained armies through winter, the replacement parts that kept vehicles fighting. Every gallon, every round, every ration had traveled those roads in the back of a deuce and a half, driven by a man who got 4 hours of sleep if he was lucky. In April 1945, as Allied armies crossed the Elbe and converged on Berlin, a small convoy of Red Ball veterans was assigned to deliver supplies to forward headquarters. They drove through territory that had been Germany, past destroyed cities and surrendering armies. Private Samuel Jones, still driving after 7 months, noted in his diary, "Past a column of German prisoners today, thousands of them walking west. One of them, an officer, watched us drive past. He counted trucks, stopped at 40, and just stared. I wonder if he understood. We weren't the end. Behind us came another convoy, and another and another. We never stopped coming. That's why they lost. Not because we were better soldiers, because we had more trucks." The simplicity of the observation captured an essential truth. The Third Reich, with its disciplined armies and tactical brilliance, had been defeated not by superior tactics, but by superior logistics. German generals had laughed at American logistics, had calculated that supply lines must break, and had planned a defensive strategy around Allied supply failures. They had calculated without understanding what American industrial capacity meant. That trucks could be built faster than armies could shoot them, that supply convoys could operate continuously because replacement vehicles arrived faster than old ones wore out, that logistics wasn't a constraint to work around, but a weapon to be deployed. The Red Ball Express became a river of trucks that flowed from Normandy to the Rhine, carrying everything an army needed to fight, advance, and win. The Germans had thought it impossible. By the time they realized it wasn't, the thunder of 10,000 internal combustion engines had already buried the Reich under an avalanche of American steel. The laughter had stopped somewhere around the Seine. By the Elbe, there was only silence.